Welcome to Encore at Illinois. My name is Anthony Messina, and I'm excited to have my colleague Beth Peterson and our wonderful panel with us today for a session titled Creating a Brave Space for the LGBTQ plus community in the large ensemble setting. So we will take a moment and allow each of the panelists to introduce ourselves. So let's start with Cheldon.
Hi, my name is Cheldon Williams. I am the Associate Director of Bands at West Virginia University, and my current teaching responsibilities include being the director of the Pride of West Virginia Marching Band, as well as doing some work with all of the other athletic bands, be it volleyball or basketball. I am also the director for the WVU Symphonic Band, and I also am teaching a little bit of arranging. I'm really happy to be here.
And Jennifer?
Hi, I'm Jen Martin. I teach at Cuesta College in California, San Luis Obispo, right on the Central Coast, about halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And I conduct the wind ensemble there. I conduct through the college a very excellent community group called the San Luis Obispo Wind Orchestra. And I teach conducting and the low brass studio. And I'm a recovering division chair, having just left that part of my professional experience about a year ago. And I'm very happy to be here with y'all today.
Thank you. And Nick?
Yeah, my name is Nick McBride, and I'm an assistant professor of music education at the College of New Jersey, where I teach undergraduate music education courses, predominantly choral, general music, as well as student teaching seminar and supervised student teachers. And I'm also very, very glad to be here, and thanks for hosting this panel.
Great. And last but not least, Bridget.
Hi, I'm Bridget Sweet. I'm Associate Professor of Music Education at the University of Illinois. Here I'm also, so Jennifer, I'm the chair now. So you've handed the baton to me in my arena. And I am the overseer of choral music ed students. I also teach some secondary general music and some graduate courses in research and a class on healthy music practices for anyone in the School of Music. And so glad to be here today.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you everybody. It's really great to see you all. My name is Beth Peterson. I'm really excited to co-host this session of Encore Illinois. And the first question is mine, and I'm gonna ask this to Bridget Sweet, and then we'll go around, and if others would like to respond, please do so. So Bridget, the first question from our students is, what defines a brave space? How do we implement these ideas into the music classroom and rehearsal, both large and small?
I love this question, and I think it's a complex question. And so I also welcome insight from my colleagues. At least in the world of music education, there's a big shift from the idea of safe spaces to brave spaces. And the conversation initially, the idea about having places where people could come and be themselves and explore who they were in the fullest capacity within these safe spaces, which is wonderful. It's a wonderful notion, and that's still very, very important. But there's been much conversation more recently about the idea of brave spaces, where those are places, be they ensemble settings or music classrooms, where people come in as themselves, but then they also have the space there to engage in critical conversation and to challenge ideas with one another and leave that space somehow being changed by the conversation that took place. And the idea is that it's not a place where someone can come in and just be racist or spouting horrible comments about stuff, but it's a space where these ideas can be facilitated. So where a safe space was come and be yourself, but we didn't really go there with the conversations and kind of pushing the boundaries of that. The idea of brave spaces is that we can't just not have these conversations anymore. And so I think implementing these ideas in music classroom and rehearsals, I think that is a really complex question and idea, because a lot of it depends on the person who's teaching the class or the ensemble. And a lot of it becomes from how much they've been able to explore topics of discrimination and diversity, and you know, if they're coming in as a middle class white suburban kind of person, they're going to have very different, especially straight, they're going to have very different experiences than someone who's coming from the perspective of being a person of color, or someone within the LGBTQ community. And so I think the first thing that needs to happen is we have to acknowledge who we are and own that, and then also then do the work and figure out what we don't know. And a lot of that goes through conversations and panels and things like this. And then stop talking and listen to what other people have to say, which I'm going to stop talking now and let my colleagues also contribute to that. We could spend the whole panel on this one question. It's a wonderful question.
Nick, it looks like you turned off your microphone. Did you want to speak next?
Oh, yeah, I saw everybody else was off, and I thought
Oh,
maybe
okay.
we should do that too. But I will contribute. I very much agree with everything Dr. Sweet said. And I think there's almost this idea that, and this is not a negative thing, but there's this active versus passive with a brave versus safe space. I think safe spaces are very active. And I think sometimes it's something as simple as putting up a sticker, a safe space sticker, which can mean the world to somebody who is LGBTQ or gender nonconforming or gender expansive, and just knowing that there is this spot in the school. And certainly that was the spot for me in K through 12. That was sort of my sanctuary, was the music classroom, where I felt the most comfortable. But I think what Dr. Sweet was referring to is also this sort of active space where we go about these difficult conversations or these clumsy conversations, and we engage in types of dialogue where nobody feels like they are marginalized. Everybody has a seat at the table. Everybody can participate in what's going on. And I think most of us who are part of a minority or marginalized population know what it's like in both explicit and subtle ways to feel outside of something, whether that's you turn on television and every single commercial is of a straight couple, or things that are more significant, like when I was getting surgery just earlier this week, and all of the nurses said, well, make sure you tell your wife, even though I have a husband, that these are the medications you need to take when you get home. I'm not mad at any of those nurses, but there's an assumption in that there's a heteronormative assumption. So I think anytime we can go into those spaces and engage in conversation where everybody has a seat at the table, that's an active pursuit. And I think that's part of the brave space identity.
So I have a follow-up, and Jennifer and Cheldon, please refer to Nick and Bridget if you want to talk about that. But for those of you who do conduct ensembles, as an ensemble conductor, I hear this. I hear what you're saying about safe and brave. How do I, as an ensemble conductor, or any of you, engage in that conversation in ensembles when we're there to make music? We're there, like we have limited time anyway, right? People are going to say, well, I'm just going to do the music, and everyone's welcome. What do you do next to make that space more brave?
Well, I think it's actually a part of the music making. Art is supposed to be a reflection of how we go about living our day-to-day lives. And our goal is to make those connections for the students through the music. And that's when the good music making happens. So if there's a time or a place to have those discussions, that is about the music, or that could in some way help to enhance the music, I say it's fair game. I think it's something that will help the musicians as human beings connect with the art that they're making.
I agree, Cheldon, very much with that. I like to take time to talk about composers because it is all about the music. So when it's appropriate, I talk a lot about composers' lives and about how things are different. I pass out material, in the syllabus and so forth. But I think at the bottom line, it's about who we are as people. And I think that students grasp on, both in positive and negative ways, about who we are and about are we making a space safe and brave? We've all had professorial experiences as students, I'm sure, where you just got a vibe from a person when you walked into a classroom for the first time, and you just went, not safe, you know, or whatever. I think I'll keep some stuff about myself to myself, right? And there are other people who you want to go out to lunch with that professor, right? And so I think who we are comes off unabashedly, honestly. And as long as we're open, I think that helps create that open space.
Bridget.
I'm not sure, am I supposed to raise my hand?
Yeah, go ahead. No, jump right in.
Like make a symbol. That was beautiful, Jennifer. I agree. I with Cheldon too. All of this, all of you, we're all on the same page with this. We're preaching to the choir. That like talking about the composers and talking about the music, and that's one of the things that I have a bee in my bonnet about, is like in pieces of music. So I'm a choral person, and octavos is like a name for the person who wrote the text, but there's this huge bio of the composer. But so I always do my research and share as much as I can about all of the people involved, so the students really understand that, and that comes with everything. For me, I don't work with college age musicians much. I tend to work with middle and high school choirs. And so one of the things that I do, and a lot of them, as we know, adolescents are kind of figuring out who I am in the grand scheme of things. So I always try, when I get introduced and then I get the mic or the whatever to go, I always say my pronouns. And I always like put that right out there, like, hey, I'm Dr. Sweet. I go by she, her, hers, you know, and I give a little bit of, I have 2 kids. I got a dog, he's eating all my stuff. You know, I just fold that into the mix of things. And then I try really hard when I'm using examples of pieces. I try really hard before even choosing repertoire, especially as a straight woman, to make sure that I'm not picking heteronormative pieces, that always try to think like, if I have anyone in my class, can everyone identify with this piece in some way, shape, or form? I think that is huge. Where we start, even before anything else, is when we start looking at rep. But also, when I'm talking about the pieces, and I'll say something like, you know, this is a song, and they're talking about someone that you think is real special. Everybody think of someone real special and picture them in your mind, you know, and I just try to leave it like gender neutral and don't go there. And I try to just make that just a natural woven into part of the rehearsal. So like right from the beginning, I hope that they pick up on, the people that need to pick up on that vibe will pick up on that vibe right away. And a lot of people, it'll go right over their heads, but it's going to matter to the people that I'm doing that for, genuinely.
It seems like a good time. We're going to talk about this later, but it seems like a good time to mention this book. And I hear, Jennifer, you're part of this.
Right.
And Anthony, we'll talk a little more about it, but there's a lot of information in this book too on this topic. So thank you, Anthony. I think you're the next question.
Yeah, all of that was really, really great. Thank you so much for that. So kind of springboarding off of that concept, you know, how can we normalize in our large ensemble settings and in our classroom, maybe even beyond repertoire, the idea of being more inclusive, not even the idea, just being more inclusive, and normalizing that, and, you know, including like situations that may revolve around concert attire. That question came up quite a bit amongst our students. How can we normalize a more gender inclusive concert attire, or you know, overnight roommate situations if you're taking your ensemble on a trip. So for this, why don't we start with Jennifer?
Well, that's a tough question. In my situation, I think I make it revolve mostly around the repertoire. For instance, with my adult group last season, the last season that wasn't truncated, we set ourselves about making sure that we included one female composer, at least one female composer, on every concert. And we made a thing about it, right? And one of the reasons I'm looking forward to a deep dive into that book is about repertoire, right? And about the lists that are included. Because I found it difficult to find appropriate repertoire for my group by female composers, right? And so just the fact that we did that said something to the players, said something to our audiences, and just made them think, maybe on a different level about that. And the other thing is about our concert attire that you mentioned. My players know that I don't really care, about what they're wearing. If it's black, it's good, in our case. So I tell the ladies in our group, it can be pants, it can be skirts, it can be dresses, it can be whatever. It can be a gentleman's jacket and shirt underneath. It can be anything. They just know that that there's no norm, for us in that area. And the young freshmen that come to school, they're taken aback by that. I say that and I put it in the syllabus, but then they'll question it. They'll come and say, well, don't we have to have all the same top or whatever? No, you don't. The main thing is I want you feeling comfortable in making music in a comfortable way, and not being inhibited by a thing that you wear. And the other aspect is in the case of students that are pretty obviously exploring their gender issues. I had a student come, and he's still in school, and presented very femininely, extraordinarily femininely. And I'm looking at the roll on the first night, and when I say his name, this person who appears female said here. And I saw, okay, made a note. And then I pulled him aside afterwards, just caught him on the way out, didn't make a thing about it. And I just said, so what would you like to share about your situation? I see male name, and I heard you say he. And so what do what are your pronouns? What would you like, for the class to do and for me to do? And and in this case, it's he. He is going by he. And by his male name, and then exploring about what happens to him in the future, which is fantastic. But he was taken aback by the fact that I asked the question. And that gets back to that safe space thing too, that he was pleased, and I think got some validation in the fact that somebody cared to ask the question, and so instantly that created that kind of safe place for him, and probably for others in the class too.
Yeah, that's great.
Jennifer, I'm going to piggyback on what you were saying. And I took it maybe a step further, which I think goes from safe to brave, because I choose, and I have chosen my entire career, and more likely later than earlier, to ask the entire group. If there are pronouns that you prefer to go by, you can come and tell me privately, or you can say it right now if you want to have that conversation in front of the group. But I want to let everyone know that this room is an inclusive room. That's something that's really important for me. And as far as concert attire is concerned, I tend to stay away from any names, female or male pronouns. Oh, women should wear this, men should wear this. I just talk about what it is that I want them to put on. You choose whatever you want to put on and show up, as long, just like you said, Jennifer, as long as it's black, we're good to go. No,
that's great. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe CBDNA recommends, the College Band Directors National Association recommends, not gendered options, but rather here's one option, here's option A, here's option B, option C, perhaps. You are welcome to wear any of those. And so, yeah, I think that's really great. Nick, how does that, manifest in your classroom? This idea of being more, inclusive.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with everything that's been said so far. And I have to admit, I do a lot of, I do some professional development for sometimes teachers on LGBTQ issues. And I'm always shocked that the uniform issue is so controversial, because there are so many options of things that students can wear when they're performing that don't have to be gender specific. To answer another part of the question, I think one of the most important things we can do with curriculum, and if repertoire is our curriculum in the ensemble setting, is not just context, but finding ways for us to dig really deep. And this, as Bridget was saying, this takes some homework on our part. But and I'm going to be careful I say this, but we're living in right now Black History Month. Black History Month is problematic in that it's 1 month in itself, and we need to get beyond the tokenism of sort of saying, oh, we're going to perform this composer because they do identify as gender expansive or LGBTQ, as opposed to digging into what is it about that identity that really shapes who they are as a composer, as a musician, as an artist. So if I'm going to do a lesson on Aaron Copland, who is referred often as the person with the quintessential American sound, how am I not going to explore the tension between the quintessential American sound and the fact that he was a closeted gay man? How am I not going to explore Leonard Bernstein being one of the most famous conductors of the 20th century, not being a gay man? How am I going to look at Madonna's music in Vogue and not look at trans people of color, those who are pushed to the sides that are now highlighted in shows like Pose in the ballroom culture of New York City? I mean, those are all lessons that we've yet to explore, I think, in a robust way in schools, but that we should explore. And so I think if we're going to take a curricular path, those are lessons that I would love us to dig into more. So just as all my colleagues are already saying, that it's not just we're doing this music because the composer is gay, but we're doing this, or LGBTQ, but we're doing this music because here's how that identity has contributed to their art or how they exist in the world. And that's something I will admit in my own research, I'm trying to explore more and more now. And part of that is honestly a personal journey. It takes a really long time to become comfortable with yourself enough as a gay person to celebrate yourself enough as a gay person, and then go and look at other people through not this kind of negative lens that you've had for a lot of your life, but then go, wow, I can shift and celebrate this identity. And that's I think a really important part of the journey we should go on as teachers.
Yeah, that's really great. That resonates with me so much, especially the idea of not tokenizing. And like I feel the same way about Pride Month, right?
Yeah.
Like we get 1 month where we get to celebrate Pride. It's like, well,
Right.
I don't know about y'all, but I'm proud all year long.
Right.
So it's like, that's just kind of like the thing. Bridget, before we move on to the next question, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think, well, I mean, I'm so honored to be a part of this conversation with these amazing people. What an honor. With regards to I agree with Nick, like the whole, I don't know why what people wear for concerts, it comes up. It's been coming up for years and it continues to come up. And I think a lot of that goes back to, military traditions. Everybody looked the same. Everybody needed to be uniform, as we don't want to distract from the sound. And I find this, it's a little bit off, but so a lot of my work is with adolescent musicians, and I'm not a purist, and I'm okay with people singing in different octaves if they're going through voice change, but there are some people that are not okay with that. Or even with trans choirs, having people singing in different octaves. Some people are not, like, if they have a student who comes out of trans in choir, what do I do with this person's voice? Because it's not going to match the rest. That's a personal journey that teacher needs to go on. And I think that's the philosophical problem with all of this. Uniform, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares. They could wear jeans and t-shirts. It doesn't matter. But there's something about the history and the institution for me in the choral world is very rooted in tradition and in this uniformity, and heaven forbid something be distracting. And I think change happens at a glacial pace. And so I would like to choose that we'll get there at some point. But the idea of saying white from hips to head, black from hips to toes, why does it need to matter what that looks like? And so I think I think this is just one of those things that we just kind of have to keep saying, like, it doesn't matter. It's about the music, it's about the people, it's about the experience, what they were. And I think too, like, I worked in a really low socioeconomic middle school for many years, and like the kids couldn't afford uniforms. And so, like, we're digging through secondhand stores and stuff. And so I think there has to be a culture shift also about this idea of uniform. And it really doesn't matter. But for some reason, it's really become woven up with gender and identity. And I'm not understanding that, but I think it's people like these folks on this panel that are going to help kind of get away from that way of thinking.
Bridget, I think that you folks in the choral world suffer through the uniform thing more than we do in the instrumental world. Marching band, a different thing, of course. Yeah, but
I don't get it.
I don't understand it, and I feel a little privileged in the instrumental world that I don't have. I never worried about it even before the awareness happened. I'm old, so one of the things, and maybe it'll pop into another question, is about how things have changed fairly recently, and that while we know that the pace of progress, as Bridget said, is glacier. With a little bit of perspective, you can see that change does happen, right? And one of the changes that I'm seeing is really about concert dress. It's really quite amazing. I would be surprised now if a student came to me and wanted to dress for the concert in a way that's not gender normative for them. I mean, that would kind of surprise me, because I just accept it as like I was saying, if it's black, it's cool. So yeah, so things do change. But in choral world, I just see all this angst and stress about it.
Well, there's the show choirs and the glitter, and the girls have to have the dresses, and the boys have to have the cummerbunds, and like the tradition. Right, Nick? Where people get scared of the tradition. Yeah.
I did my undergrad at Westminster Choir College, so I mean, I know about tradition in the choral world. But yeah, and as all of you are saying, there is still a way to look very professional and perform, if that's important to you, fine. But not. I mean, I guess the other part of this is looking at it from, are you really going to look a student in the eye, a middle school, high school student, and say, you have to appear in something that does not align with your gender identity in order to perform these 5 songs tonight for 20 minutes? Like, that's the question. So if that means that as a choral director, you say, oh, wow, you're going to wear, black shirt, black pants, a gender neutral ensemble, and still look as professional as ever, and that's what you're giving up to do that, I think that's a pretty fair price to ask someone to let somebody feel comfortable in who they are when they're standing up with a group that's hopefully very also part of their identity. So.
Great, thank you, folks. I'm going to move on to the next question, and I'm going to ask Cheldon to be the first person to respond to this one. Our students wanted to know, how do you create a safe space in communities that might be less accepting or might actively campaign against the LGBTQ community?
I saw this question and I thought, this is a problem for me personally, answering this question because of my upbringing. I have to tell you, I was fortunate to go to a school that was as mixed across all areas and across all boundaries as possible. Was, a smaller representation of Asian and South Asian, but fairly equal representation of Hispanic, white, and Black. I went to school in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. As far as gay and straight representation, that was all there. As far as socioeconomic representation at my school, because of where it was placed, we got a couple of the kids from this side of the track and we got a couple of kids from that side of the track. So all of that being said, this was not something that I could draw on personal experience from. And I have to be honest about that. And as far as I'm concerned, and where I've been and what I've taught and what I've seen is this was not a huge concern for me. So how do I create now the space that I don't necessarily 100% have experience representing? It is a little bit challenging for me, but the thing that I'm interested in as a teacher is to just make sure that everybody, all of the students that are there, feel safe, even though, can I take this away from the LGBTQ question and maybe bring this to race or socioeconomic background?
Sure.
Because I have to remove that from the situation growing up in pretty much the gay capital of the United States, in Fort Lauderdale, as far as gay men are concerned. But making sure that every student had equal access was the biggest thing for me in my classroom. Access to opportunities for leadership, access to opportunities for greatness, for them to be able to aspire to be great. Having them be led by me, and if we can go back to the gay LGBTQ subject for a while, having them see me as a representation is powerful. And we recently heard this over all of the things that was going on in the rhetoric of the election and the inauguration. There was something that was brought up about the example of power versus the power of example. That was really important. That part is really important to me and what I can offer my students from the LGBTQ standpoint. But going back to what we're talking about all the other barriers, the myriad of barriers that can go into place, I just wanted to make sure that my students had access to everything that any other student had access to. They all knew they were on equal footing in terms of being given opportunities.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to address that question or have had an experience? Nick?
You know, I hope it's the only anecdote I have that leads into an answer is I was doing a chat. I'll be careful how I was doing a chat at another university, and I walked in with my Northeastern sensibility, and I made a mistake in doing that. Meaning that I walked in assuming, because I work on a very liberal campus in the middle of, and I don't mean to tie this to politics, but forward-leaning, very accepting, very open to the LGBTQ population place at the College of New Jersey, and that's a wonderful thing about working there. And I walked into this space, and it was still a very accepting space to talk about my research and LGBTQ teachers and students in choral spaces. And at the end of the talk, a student said to me, Dr. McBride, I really appreciate everything that you're saying, but I identify, and then shared his religion and said, you know, and I was raised to believe that you are going to hell, and that, you know, you know, said other things, I'm going to phrase it inappropriately, but said, how do I create an inclusive classroom space if I believe that you are, you know, yeah. Now, and I'll tell you, being as personal as I can be, I got in my car and I called my colleague who I'm very close with, who's instrumental music ed at TCNJ, and started crying actually, because it had been so long that since someone had looked me right in the eye and said, hey, I think you're going to hell. I mean, it had been just a really long time since I'd experienced that, in my 20s for sure and before, but not for a while. And I'm trying to think of how I responded to that person in that class. And I think in the most diplomatic way I could, I said, you know, listen, I'm not here to insist my cultural sensibilities on you. That's not my job. My job is to share my research with you. And I brought up my husband. My husband is a physician. And I said, if you were to come into the ER, he would offer you care as a doctor regardless of what your religion is, what your background is, your ethnicity, and so on. And it's my job to do the same thing as a teacher. And I'm not answering your question totally, I'm coming at it from the other way. But the idea that I'm trying to get at is, I think there are things that we can do in communities that are not as inviting to difference and diversity, that are small and subversive at first, until we can get our footing to slowly change the culture. I would not suggest to a 22-year-old who is stepping in for the first time in a job, just jump in there and rip everything apart. You have to find out, who has the power in that school district and where are the small ways that you can make change. That's not to say that I don't think there are communities where we don't need to kind of burn everything down and start over. Absolutely. But if you want the change to last, you have to step in there, find your allies, find ways to include some of the suggestions we've already talked about, like repertoire, other English, math, science, social studies teachers in the school who will do interdisciplinary lessons with you, start a GSA, start programming that recognizes and celebrates the LGBTQ identity, show role models, and slowly start to change that culture so it's more and more open. Because no matter what, and then I'll stop talking, I promise, there are people in that community who need you to be there and need you to be out and need you to be talking about those communities. So those communities need it probably even more than others. So
thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And thank you for sharing your story. And I think that's where this question is coming from, is, these students, younger students who are about to go out and student teach or be first year teachers and are already thinking about all the things that they struggle with as first year teachers and want to make positive change.
Sure.
Thank you. Bridget.
Thanks, Nick, for that. And also Cheldon for your answer to this. I have a couple of thoughts. I did a research study a number of years ago with one of my students who identified as gay. And this was with a colleague actually of mine, Stephen Paparo, who's at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And he had a student who identified as lesbian. And so we traced them across the student teaching semester when they were student teaching about their experiences of navigating their personal identity and their professional identity. It was really interesting because Stephen's student teacher was placed with two cooperating teachers who identified as lesbian, and mine was in a very rural, small town situation. And the long and short of it is that there was some, once my student, his name will go by Brett in the paper, once his co-op found out that he was gay, it seemed cool at first, and she made some adjustments as far as like, instead of asking him like, do you have a girlfriend? Like, so is there someone special in your life, kind of a thing. But then it felt really free to make comments about like, oh, you should know lots of things about fashion because you're gay. And like, just felt like, and started saying these things that became really offensive to him. And he was very aware that there were no signs for support of any sort of diversity in that school system or anything like that. And so we had a lot of talks about, as a finding of the study is like, as developing teachers, like you're not going to work in every school district. Like every school district is not going to align with your values. And if you find that that you want to fight for students and you want to be an overt ally to the LGBTQ community, there are just some schools where you're probably not going to be able to work. And like Nick said, like you have to find your allies, but if you can't get allies in the administrative level, so when you start making these efforts and starting the GSA, which I'm like totally on board with that, and even like being covert about it, some parent is going to call the principal and want your job. And if you don't have the backing of that, someone who can help you, especially if you're untenured, that can be really problematic. And so I think as students are looking for positions, getting a sense of the culture of the place and trying to kind of figure out like if this is a good place for me and what kind of change can I make. And it's a long game. Like if you get into a place where there's not a culture where these conversations can be had and these students can be overtly supported, you just have to be prepared to be there for a while to make these. And I agree, like over time, it can change, but that's a long game. And a lot of people just don't have the heart or the patience for that. And that's a sad thing. But I think, being as covert at first and then being more open, but also the ally piece is huge. And then also just being honest with yourself and being like, I don't know if I can function in this culture if I can't do the kind of teaching and be the person for these students that I need to be.
Thank you.
I think the awareness of who you are is key. I think that was a really marvelous statement. You have to decide as a professional and as a human being what you're willing to do in a professional situation, especially when you're first coming out of college, in my opinion. So picking and choosing where you apply is important, and how you present yourself, the attitude with which you present yourself in an interview situation is just vital. I've interviewed for 2 positions post transition, and I've accepted positions at both of those institutions, and the one thing that was that was in common ground between the two was when they asked the diversity question. All right, when they asked the standard kind of question, it's a little bit of tokenism again, but when they asked the kind of standard question of, what is your view of diversity in an academic setting, some question like that, I kind of take it lightly and say, basically, are you kidding me? I'm like walking diversity. Right, I will check all the boxes for you in your HR department, right? So, and just kind of keep it light like that, and they then sense a kind of attitude about it, and I think it's helped in getting me hired because I've been honest about the situation, and then I get a sense from them, right? Because as you know, and students, if you don't know this, you should know this, that when you're in an interview situation, you're interviewing the employer as much as they're interviewing you, right? So you get a sense then of, what's their reaction when that happens? What's the interviews panel's reaction to that? What's their attitude? And you can, if you're at all aware in the world, you get a strong sense of things. And if you get this vibe from an administrator, you might want to think twice about accepting that position if it's offered to you. So I think it's again goes back to about who we are as humans and really listening in the world and really being aware.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
So that all kind of, dovetails into what our next question was to be anyway, which is most of us on the panel here are part of the LGBTQ community. This is something that I know I struggled with really until I got the job here at Illinois, of how much of ourselves do we share with our students, day to day or in a given position. And why don't we start with Nicholas on this?
Yeah. I think this is a very personal question and very personal call. Similar to the study that Bridget was talking about, my dissertation focused on LGBTQ music educators who were navigating their personal and professional identity at school, and the challenges they faced of kind of having a whole identity outside of school and then a whole identity in school. I think it has got to be your level of comfort with how much you want to share. When I was teaching high school, I was mostly closeted until I knew I was leaving the high school to go start my doctorate. And then my husband so I showed up after a concert and all my students were like gathered around my office. And I was like, what is going on? And my husband happened to be waiting in my office. And I was like, oh God, it's out. And we used to show up in 2 separate cars, and he used to leave at the end of the concert, and we would meet at Denny's or then talk about the concert at home or something. I mean, that was my reality for most of my public school teaching career. But it's so personal, and all of the people I spoke with, my participants, it was a different journey for all of them, and different factors played into it. Some felt the privilege of having a significant other, and I use that word specifically because it's been an outcome of some research to say, well, I am with someone, and now because I am with someone, I want to share that with another person, and other people feel that they want to kind of have these lives bifurcated, and they have their identity outside of school and inside of school. I think if you can, and I think if you feel comfortable enough, it's a wonderful thing. And I say this knowing that I now work in college and it's easier, but it's a wonderful thing for your students to see you as an LGBTQ role model. If you feel comfortable, I would never tell anyone to come out unless they're comfortable doing so, but I think it is a good thing. And anyone who is a former middle or high school teacher knows that that age level in particular is extremely inquisitive about your personal life. And so it's hard to navigate that barrier, but if you feel comfortable, I think it's a good thing.
That's great. Cheldon, you look like you had a thought on this.
Yeah, I want to second what Nick said about having the whole thing be very personal. And I think it kind of goes back to how your whole coming out story was. If you are LGBTQ, that has lasting effects. And I don't have the research in front of me right now, but I know that has lasting effects on how you interact with the world in general. So work is just an extension of that. But for me, it has always been an unspoken truth. And I don't know if it's due to a lack of bravery, but I was able to present myself in a way that left no questions. And I was fortunate enough to do so because we talked about earlier about where I grew up. And that's going to be different. Environment is also going to play into that. But as far as what information I would tell my students about me personally, I tend to keep things really professional. And if that situation or subject comes up, you know, the old gruff band director and me will come out, and it's not something that, you know, I would hope that those conversations are not being had with any other teachers or any other professionals about what's going on personally with who, you know, your teacher may or may not be sharing their beds with or whatever have you. It goes back to this idea of professionalism. And I just, for me personally, my story, I just don't think that is something that will help the music. I just don't think that that is something that will help the student per se, because they have to see you as Dr. So-and-so or Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so. And I'm okay with there being some boundaries. Boundaries are okay, you know?
Yep, agreed. Anyone else, any comments or thoughts on that? I would just a quick addition myself. You know, there was a time in my career where I remember trying to hide the fact that I was part of the LGBTQ community. And just as I developed and became comfortable in my own skin, it just became a natural. I didn't try and hide anything. I wasn't volunteering anything, but you're not necessarily hiding it when it comes up. When middle school kids or high school kids, oh, do you have a wife? No, I don't have a husband, and then move on. And just leave it as it is. There doesn't need to be any more about that. So thank you all so much for those answers.
Can I just real quick tag on to that? And I just want to say in the University of Illinois system, Louis Berganzi's article from 2008, 2009 in the MEJ speaks to this very issue and the challenges that it's a great sort of article that began and changed and shifted so much of the conversation about little tiny things like having a ring on your finger and the questions that can come with that, or the hetero having something like your picture on your desk, and how a straight teacher may be allowed to do that, but a gay teacher isn't. And it just talks about some of those inequities, which I think are really important to discuss in this conversation too. So just thought I'd throw that in there.
That's great. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I don't want to,
Yeah, Cheldon.
sorry, I don't want to come across as flippant, you know, in my comment on this. That is not at all my intention. I understand that within being Black and within being a part of the LGBTQ community, I am still somewhat privileged, you know? So I don't want to speak for everyone and say, oh, well, I was able to show up as strongly and as authentically me as I can, and everyone else should be able to do that. That's not at all where I'm coming from. Because I understand, like we spoke about a little bit earlier, people have different circumstances, different environments. All of these things dictate how you interact with the world. And far be it for me to say anyone should, but my personal experience is I was able to just show up, and I never allowed for that to be a part of the conversation when making connections with my students as human beings.
Can I make a comment from a cooperating teacher standpoint? I had a student teacher once who he delayed his student teaching actually because he decided to come out to gay as his family and friends, and it was a really traumatic experience for him. And so he delayed student teaching for a year. And then when he came to work with me, he was really what we're talking about. He was in a lot of strife and trying to decide how to navigate the world kind of as who he knew he was and how the world might respond to him. And that was very, very difficult for him to try and also put on top of that a teacher identity. And so I think you know, there was a lot of conversations with him. There was a lot of finding him other people to speak with and other resources. And so I think for anyone watching that is in this in the place of your life where your identity feels, I don't want to say unsettled, but that you're still struggling with those issues, to try and then go forth and then secure a teacher identity on that. Because if you're not comfortable with who you are, becoming a teacher in front of a classroom of people that are always scrutinizing you makes it even more complicated. And the student teaching was really hard for him. And so but I don't think he felt he could reach out. And the message that I'm trying to just say is, like, there are people there, you have friends, you have all of these people here, you have allies out there, you have counseling services available. There are lots of people that are willing to just listen and be a support to you as you're getting ready to go work in front of students, and so that you feel like you can be as successful as possible, and that it's okay if you don't feel, you know, no one feels like they know who they are as an undergraduate student regardless. But if you have also this other layer of identity on there that's feeling really unsettled and tumultuous at the moment, don't suffer in silence, especially before you go out to work with kids, because it will make it very difficult and challenging. And I've seen that from the other side, and trying to help this lovely person. It was very difficult for him, and it was very heartbreaking. So.
Bridget, I think you bring up just an excellent point. When we put on the suit of teacher, right, and in that pre-professional year where you're, you know, student teaching and starting to work in the field, and then you have this other, to some extent or another, kind of closeted existence, or not, but many do have this kind of closeted existence about it. My goodness, what it's like a suit on top of a suit, and how many layers of the onion are you willing to peel off, you know, to be your genuine self, and how much of yourself are you willing to give up to please other people, right? That's always kind of the question with me. And students have, you know, X-ray goggles on. They've got Superman, Superwoman X-ray vision, and they know who you are. They just know. And how much of the, you know, how much are you willing to continue to hide in your life? In my case, I never talk about my issues unless somebody asks me, and I think they know that if a student wants to talk to me about my journey, then I'm open book to talk with them about it, but I don't, I don't just kind of put it out there. And that seems to work. I neither hide who I'm married to and what my past was, but neither do I take out an ad in the newspaper. In fact, Eric's book and this panel are really the two first professional times in my long career where I've talked about these issues. This is all kind of new for me. And my willingness to do it is because I've sensed that students are more in need of needing a role model, role models. And it's just interesting in my situation that people are more surprised about who I'm married to and the fact that I have a wife than they are about my other aspects of my past. It's really interesting. And so I don't say at the beginning of class, I'm, blah, 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 and my wife is blah, blah, blah. It just comes up in conversation. And I think it's part of being genuine, and being genuine is part of what creates the safety and the brave spaces, in my opinion.
I'm watching the clock and I think your answers are so amazing and I'm learning so much and I really appreciate it. I'm going to ask the last question that's written on our question sheet because it's from some students. But the last question, if you don't mind, the last question, if you don't mind, it was Anthony's, and it's to say, is there anything else you'd like to say or talk about that we didn't get to? Because the question I'm supposed to ask, I think we've sort of talked about already, so I don't want to repeat anything, but it was to talk about this book that Jennifer just mentioned. And the question is, with the recent publication by GAA of this really great resource for wind band, do you have any strategies for creating a safe or brave and open space for gender expression in the ensemble setting? And how does repertoire choice and the large ensemble factor into this? How much background information about a composer should a conductor share with their students? And I feel like you've talked about that. So if you want to add to that, or if there's anything else you'd like to share before we conclude today, now would be the time. Oh, and I think I was going to ask Bridget first on this question. So Bridget.
Is there anything I have to add to share? That's my question.
Well, is there anything on that question that I feel like we've already talked about that you want to add to, or is there anything else in general you'd like to talk about?
I think when I was a teacher in the middle school long years ago, these were not conversations that we had. I can remember defending when someone would use the "that's so gay" comment and going off in my classroom because I knew it was wrong, and I have a lot of loved ones and family members who identify as LGBTQ. I never at that time, because we were having these conversations, thought that when I was saying all of these things pro LGBTQ students, how many of the students in front of me were actually part of that population that I was defending. Like it just never occurred. We're talking like 20 years ago. That wasn't something that we ever talked about in the world in which I lived at that time. And I can remember so strongly one of my students coming up to me at the end of class one day, the 7th grader, and we're still in touch, and her just leaning in and saying, "Thank you for the things that you said." And then just like wandering away. And I was like, well, of course, but it never occurred to me that she would be gay. Like that had never crossed my mind that's why she was thanking me. And I think I have so many students now that are openly gay. Facebook's a wonderful thing for keeping in touch with all these beautiful people. And I have many students who have transitioned to different identities and in all sorts of different ways and so forth. So I think the bottom line is that as a teacher, we have so much power, it's almost scary. And the things that you say matter, and you never know who they will be affecting and how they will be affecting students. And so I think just the kindness that you pay forward is going to affect people in positive ways that you can't even anticipate yet, because even in 20 years, we're going to be having other conversations. And so the things that you do now are going to be protecting and wrapping kids in hugs and helping them to feel safe and secure in ways you can't even imagine. So be a good person and honor all of your students. But I guess I've just learned in hindsight that I'm so thankful and glad that I was brought up the way that I was brought up and said those positive things that have helped students that at the time I just said because they were the right things to say, and there was no agenda. And so I just encourage people to just continue to kind of keep that in mind. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else before we finish up?
No, thank you. This I agree with everything that Bridget said, and I mean, the one thing that this shows is the 6 different people on this panel. There's several perspectives to be shared and several experiences, and all of them should be heard, and we should think about all of them, particularly as new teachers, and open up spaces for these conversations more and more so that we can hear all the nuances. There's a really wonderful thing about the acronym being LGBTQ but then there's a lot in between there. There's a lot of different stories in there, in all those letters that need to be shared. So I thank you guys for having this talk.
Thanks, Nick.
All right.
Jennifer or Sheldon, do you have anything to add?
Just to thank everybody again, and my colleagues on the panel. What a great joy to meet you all, and the fact that this kind of conversation can now exist. I just remember the times very clearly where, I would just as soon or be more likely to believe that a UFO would land on my roof than there would be a conversation like this in the education field. Even in the more kind of liberal area of arts education, just unthinkable that this would happen just a few short years ago. So all the students and other people watching out there, just know that the arc of justice does bend forward, and that things get better as long as we keep working for it. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, and I also want to say thank you to all of you. I learned a tremendous amount just sitting on this panel today. And I think students, you recognize, even in all of us that are on the same page, we're on the same side of things, there are divergent views, points of view that we all have, but I think that's a huge lesson for us as we go into the teaching field, or we go out into the world. Just imagine that your opinion and your experience is not everyone else's experience. And if you can do that, I think it would ultimately serve you as a teacher, and it's going to help you to be there and be the advocate and create the safe and brave spaces for the students of which you have, of whom you have the charge. So that's something I think is really, really important. And again, thank you guys all for having me here.
Thank you all so much for being here. Anthony?
Well, thank you all for sharing your time and expertise with us and stories. I know I speak for myself. I can't speak for anyone else on how much I learned today, and how grateful I am to know that there's amazing colleagues doing the hard work every day out there in the profession. So thank you. Also, thank you to Beth for moderating this with me. And to all of you joining in online, thank you for attending another Encore at Illinois, and we hope you will take a look at all of our other wonderful videos and panel discussions that we have. Thank you for joining us.